In the serene town of Maplewood, where familiarity among residents was the norm and secrets were difficult to conceal, Dr. Julia Morgan stood as a highly regarded physician. Renowned for her empathy, commitment, and the tranquility she exuded in her interactions with patients, she cultivated a flourishing medical practice. However, beneath the facade of her seemingly idyllic existence lay a complex web of deception that would culminate in an unforeseen murder, shocking the entire community. This narrative explores the unraveling of Dr. Morgan's concealed life, marked by infidelity with her patients, leading to a tragic conclusion that reverberated throughout Maplewood. Julia Morgan appeared to possess everything: a prosperous medical career, an elegant home in a prestigious neighborhood, and a devoted husband, Tom Morgan, who had always championed her achievements. Tom, a high school history teacher, took pride in Julia's success and frequently shared her accomplishments with friends and colleagues. To those who knew them, Julia and Tom epitomized the ideal couple: intelligent, kind, and profoundly in love. Their romance began during their college years, where Julia pursued a medical degree while Tom focused on education. They were the couple admired by many, with Tom's laid-back demeanor perfectly complementing Julia's ambitious spirit. After graduation, they settled in Maplewood, where Julia launched her medical practice and Tom began his teaching career at the local high school. Over the years, they constructed a seemingly unbreakable life together, characterized by mutual respect, love, and shared aspirations. However, as time progressed, Julia's role as a physician began to shift. The increasing demands of long hours, the stress associated with managing her practice, and the emotional burden of caring for ill patients began to take a toll on her. Tom observed the shift in his wife's demeanor but attributed it to the challenges of her profession. He endeavored to support her by assuming additional responsibilities at home and encouraging her to prioritize self-care. However, what Tom remained unaware of was that Julia's escalating discontent stemmed from something far more troubling than the pressures of her job, an undercurrent that would ultimately disrupt their lives. It all began innocently. Julia had always shown a deep empathy for her patients, often going the extra mile to ensure they felt comfortable and cared for. Yet, one patient, Mark, a prosperous businessman who regularly visited Julia for checkups, began to stand out. Mark was charming, confident, and attentive, qualities that drew Julia in. Initially, their interactions remained strictly professional, but as time passed, a flirtatious rapport began to develop. Mark would casually comment on Julia's beauty or remark on how fortunate her husband was to have her. Flattered by this attention, Julia found herself anticipating Mark's appointments more than was appropriate. One evening, after a particularly taxing day, Mark suggested they go out for a drink to unwind. Although it seemed like an innocent proposal, Julia recognized that it crossed a boundary. Nevertheless, she agreed, rationalizing it as merely a friendly outing. They chose a quiet bar on the outskirts of town where the two engaged in an extensive discussion about life, work, and various topics as the evening progressed. Gradually, their conversation shifted to more intimate matters. Mark revealed to Julia the challenges he faced in his marriage, while Julia, in turn, shared her own feelings of discontent and isolation. Both were aware that they were venturing into precarious territory, yet neither felt inclined to retreat. One drink led to another, and before Julia realized it, they were sharing a fervent kiss in a secluded corner of the bar. This moment represented a lapse in judgment, a brief weakness, but it also marked the onset of a much darker chapter. The affair with Mark soon became a frequent occurrence, with clandestine meetings and late-night encounters integrating into Julia's life. She reassured herself that it was merely a fling, a means to escape the burdens of her existence, yet deep down, she recognized the peril she was courting. As Julia's relationship with Mark progressed, she found herself increasingly captivated by the allure of the forbidden. The secrecy, the deceit, and the thrill of being with someone other than her husband became an intoxicating diversion from her mundane routine. However, Mark was not the only patient who piqued Julia's interest. She also became entangled with others. There was David, a young attorney grappling with the pressures of a high-profile case, who sought Julia's assistance for stress management and anxiety. Their sessions soon evolved into something far more personal, as David's vulnerability drew Julia in. Then there was James, a widower facing his own struggles. Following the death of his wife, Julia, who had long struggled with depression, developed a particular fondness for James. Their professional relationship gradually transformed into an emotional affair. James appreciated the attention and care Julia provided, beginning to view her not merely as his doctor but also as a confidant and friend. Subsequently, two additional patients entered Julia's life: Michael, an artist with a troubled history, and Richard, a former soldier grappling with PTSD. Each found comfort in Julia, becoming ensnared in her web of deceit. For Julia, these affairs served as a means to cope with her own dissatisfaction, providing a sense of desire and need that her marriage no longer fulfilled. However, as her number of affairs increased, so did the complexity of her life. Julia found herself constantly managing lies, sneaking around, and living in fear of discovery. She was acutely aware of the immorality of her actions, yet the excitement of these secret relationships proved too alluring to abandon. Meanwhile, Tom began to observe changes in his wife that he could no longer overlook. Julia appeared increasingly distant, distracted, and irritable. She spent extended hours at the office, and when at home, she was often preoccupied with her phone, texting or checking messages. Tom attempted to address his concerns with her, but Julia dismissed them, claiming she was merely stressed from work. Despite her reassurances, Tom could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. He became more vigilant regarding Julia's behavior, noting the way she smiled at her phone or seemed lost in thought. He even began to suspect the possibility of another person in her life, yet he chose to suppress these thoughts. Tom set aside his doubts, unwilling to accept the possibility that his cherished wife could ever betray him. He resolved to surprise Julia by bringing her lunch at the office, knowing she had been putting in long hours. However, upon his arrival at the clinic, he was informed that Julia was out to lunch with a patient. A wave of jealousy washed over him, yet he refrained from jumping to conclusions. He chose to wait in her office for her return. When Julia finally entered, she appeared visibly taken aback to see him. "Tom, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice slightly quivering. "I thought I would surprise you with lunch," Tom replied, attempting to maintain a lighthearted tone. "But it seems you already have plans." Julia quickly regained her composure and forced a smile. "Oh, it was just a last-minute arrangement. A patient was having a difficult day, and I thought it would be beneficial to talk over lunch. But I would love to have lunch with you as well. Let's go." As they sat down to eat, Tom could not shake the feeling that Julia was concealing something from him. He attempted to engage her in conversation, but she seemed distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Tom realized he needed to uncover the truth behind her behavior, yet he hesitated to confront her without more substantial evidence. He decided to give it time, hoping she would eventually confide in him. However, Julia had no intention of revealing her secrets. She was too entrenched in her affairs and consumed by the web of lies she had spun. As time passed, the strain on their marriage intensified, driving a wedge between them. The situation reached a critical point one evening when Tom received an anonymous letter in the mail. A letter arrived without a return address, containing only a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "Your wife is cheating on you with multiple patients." Tom's heart plummeted as he absorbed the words he had long dreaded. Although he had suspected Julia's infidelity, seeing it explicitly stated felt like a devastating blow. He took a seat, struggling to comprehend the shocking revelation, while his thoughts raced. Who could have sent this letter? Was it true? If so, how long had this betrayal been occurring? Tom realized he could not dismiss the letter. He resolved to confront Julia that evening, hoping she would refute the claims and ease his troubled mind. However, when he presented her with the letter, Julia's response was far from what he had anticipated. She turned pale, her eyes widening in disbelief as she read the note. "Tom, I don't know who sent this, but it's not true," she stammered. Yet, Tom could see the fear reflected in her eyes and the way her hands shook as she clutched the letter. In that moment, he understood that the letter contained the truth. His wife had indeed been unfaithful, and the realization was devastating. "How long, Julia?" he asked, his voice trembling. "How long have you been deceiving me?" Julia attempted to deny the accusations, but the burden of her guilt was overwhelming. She could see the pain etched on Tom's face, the betrayal evident in his expression. Her defenses crumbled, and she broke down, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Tom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never meant to hurt you, it just..." It just happened. Tom felt as though his entire world was collapsing. The woman he had loved and trusted for so many years had been leading a double life, concealing her infidelity. Behind the facade of a devoted wife, the anguish was unbearable, leaving him at a loss for how to react. A tumult of anger and sorrow surged within him, but above all, he experienced an overwhelming sense of loss, the loss of the life he believed he had and the future he had envisioned with Julia. Why Julia? He questioned, his voice quivering. What drove you to this? Was I not enough for you? Julia could not meet his eyes. She struggled to articulate the reasons for her actions, as even she was not entirely aware of them. The allure of the affairs, the escape from her own discontent, and the desire to feel wanted had all led her to make choices she now profoundly regretted. I am so sorry, Tom, she murmured, her voice barely audible. I never intended to hurt you. I have made countless mistakes, and I wish I could undo them. However, Tom found it impossible to forgive her in that moment. The betrayal cut too deeply, and the wounds were still raw. He rose and exited the room, leaving Julia to grapple with her guilt and shame. In the days that ensued, Tom's anguish morphed into anger. He could not escape thoughts of the letter, the affairs, and the deceptions Julia had woven. His trust in her lay in ruins, and he felt foolish for not recognizing the signs sooner. The love he once held for her was now overshadowed by the bitterness of betrayal. Julia, too, was in turmoil. She attempted to reach out to Tom in hopes of reconciling their relationship, but he had completely shut her out. The silence that enveloped them was deafening, and Julia felt as though she were suffocating under the weight of her own guilt. Her affairs had provided a fleeting escape from her troubles, yet they had ultimately led her to a far darker place. Julia was now confronted with the repercussions of her actions, and the burden was overwhelming. The patience she had once engaged with began to withdraw, sensing a shift in her demeanor. The charm and appeal that had previously attracted them to her had vanished, replaced by an atmosphere of discomfort and tension. Consequently, her practice began to decline, with patients canceling appointments and rumors circulating regarding her lack of professionalism. As her life spiraled further out of control, Julia experienced an increasing sense of isolation. The affairs that had once provided her with excitement and satisfaction now felt empty and devoid of meaning. She had lost everything of significance: her marriage, her career, and the esteem of her community. With each day that passed, the weight of guilt and regret intensified, gnawing at her insides. Tom's anger and resentment grew over time, consuming him from within. He was unable to release the feelings of betrayal and struggled to move beyond the pain. The love he had once harbored for Julia had morphed into something dark and twisted, a toxic blend of rage and heartbreak from which he could not escape. One night, after enduring weeks of sleeplessness and obsessive thoughts, Tom reached his limit. The idea of cohabiting with Julia any longer was unbearable, yet he found himself unable to leave, feeling ensnared in a nightmare with no exit. In a moment of desperation, he resolved to confront Julia one final time, seeking answers and understanding regarding her actions. He stormed into the bedroom. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, engulfed in her thoughts, when Tom confronted her, his voice quivering with rage. Why did you do this to us, to me? I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? Julia raised her gaze, her eyes brimming with sorrow. I'm sorry, Tom, she replied softly. I don't know what else to say. I've made so many mistakes, and I cannot change what I've done. However, her apology only intensified Tom's fury. He could not comprehend how she had discarded their life together for trivial affairs. In his eyes, she had obliterated everything they had built, and he found it impossible to forgive her. In that moment, something within Tom snapped. A wave of anger surged through him, overwhelming his senses and clouding his judgment. Without a second thought, he seized the nearest object, a heavy glass paperweight from Julia's desk, and hurled it at her in a fit of blind rage. The paperweight struck Julia on the side of her head with a sickening thud, causing her to collapse to the floor, blood pooling around her. Tom stood frozen in shock as the gravity of his actions began to dawn on him. The anger that had consumed him moments earlier was swiftly replaced by a chilling, numbing fear. He dropped to his knees beside Julia, his hands shaking as he attempted to staunch the bleeding, but it was too late. The blow had been fatal, and Julia was already gone. Tom's hands were stained with her blood, and he understood that there was no way to undo what he had done. His life, already in ruins, was now completely shattered by Julia's death. The authorities were summoned, and he was arrested at the scene, still in shock and covered in his wife's blood, where he confessed to the crime. The individual responsible for the murder struggled to understand how his life had deteriorated so drastically. The subsequent trial became a sensational event, with the once revered physician's extramarital affairs and the shocking murder dominating news headlines. The small town of Maplewood was shaken by the scandal, transforming the community's admiration for Tom and Julia into feelings of pity and contempt. During the trial, Tom's defense contended that he had been pushed to his limits by Julia's betrayal and the psychological anguish that ensued. Conversely, the prosecution depicted him as a man whose anger and jealousy had overtaken him, culminating in a brutal and senseless act of violence. Ultimately, Tom was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The once promising educator, known for his compassion and commitment, became a broken individual, tormented by the memories of his actions. In prison, he spent his time reflecting on his past, haunted by the reality that he had taken the life of the woman he had once cherished above all else. Julia's death marked a tragic conclusion to a life brimming with potential. She had been a skilled physician, a respected community member, and a devoted wife, at least outwardly. However, her decisions led her down a perilous path that ultimately cost her everything. The narrative of Tom and Julia Morgan serves as a cautionary tale regarding the perils of deceit, infidelity, and unchecked emotions, reminding us that our choices can have profound consequences and that the secrets we harbor can obliterate not only our lives but also those of others. The events that transpired in Maplewood not only impacted our own lives but also those of our loved ones. The scandal and tragedy that unfolded left an indelible mark on the community, compelling it to confront the more sinister aspects of human nature. The narrative of Tom and Julia serves as a poignant reminder of life's fragility and the devastating consequences of deceit. Ultimately, this tale reveals that there are no victors, only shattered lives, broken dreams, and the lingering memory of what might have been. However, by sharing their story, it is hoped that others may glean valuable lessons from their missteps and find a path to evade a similar tragic outcome. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like this video for more true crime content. We encourage you to share your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.